Welcome everybody. My name is Dale Hegland. I'm with the North Dakota LTAP group, and with me we've got a wonderful panel, a couple from North Dakota, South Dakota, and then we've got the TSP2 group. So with me is Kelly Bankston. He is part of the LTAP group in North Dakota, and Greg Vavro with the South Dakota LTAP. And then we've got Travis Kinney and Greg Freeman with the TSP2 group. So my very great privilege to be with you today and share a little bit about bridge preservation. You know, bridge preservation is a unique animal. It used to be that we'd put a culvert, a bridge in place and just let it ride. It'll take care of itself. Just put it in, forget about it until something bad happens. Those days are gone. We now, like pavement preservation, gravel preservation, we have bridge preservation. And how do we take care of those important assets on a roadway network, make sure that they're going to last? How do we change the oil, so to speak, in the vehicle on the bridge network? That's what we want to help everyone, remind everyone of our challenge that we have in front of us and what we should be working on. So with that, I'd like to share a little bit about what North Dakota bridge health looks like, what we have in the state, what we're doing and where we're planning to head. So Kelly's queuing up our slide, and thank you, Kelly. So a little bridge health update. Now, in North Dakota, we're unique. Maybe we like to be number one. We like to be like Texas, right? Okay, maybe we're not unique. Maybe every state wants to be the number one state in the nation. We happen to be number two, right behind Texas in oil production. So that's pretty good. But then we're also a really heavy ag state. And on the ag end, we are extremely proud of number one, honey production, over 34 million pounds of honey every year. Crazy, right? Number one in the nation for honey. We're number one for wheat, number one for barley, sunflowers, flax, edible beans, and the list goes on. Number one. In football, we do fairly well in football around the nation. In hockey, we do pretty well, very well, not just pretty well. And so we like being number one. But that's not always the case. That doesn't always happen. So when we look at how we're sitting around the nation, and Kelly, if you would, please, we don't hit number one on every aspect. Number 40 is where we're sitting on the bridge. And number 40, well, that's not number one. That's not where we want to be. We're not, it's a struggle for us. It's a tough pill for us to swallow. We're number 40. So let's look at it a different way. Let's look at it as though top 25, highest percent of poor bridges. Now we're number 10. I like number 10, that's better, right? If you want to be number one, if you're competitive, at least 10 sounds better than 40, but it's not. It's not at all. Our bridge condition in the state, it mirrors what we have around us. We have an awful lot of local bridges that need attention. In North Dakota, we have 3,100 bridges on the local network. Of those, only 47% are good. Just so roughly half are good. That means fair and poor. 14% are in the poor category. That gets us that number 10 designation that we don't like. On the other end, looking at it a different way, we have 21% of our bridges that are posted on the local network. 700 of our bridges have load limit restrictions. What does that do to our business economy, our business model? We're trying to get oil, we're trying to get honey, we're trying to get ag products out. Well, it hurts. It hurts. So we can do better. We recognize the opportunity, and it's all about money, right? Well, money and how we take care of things, how we change the oil. So that number 10 spot, that number 40 spot, however we look at it, this is what it looks like in the lay of the land. Every year we have conditions like this, bridges down in the state. It's unfortunate. That bridge, probably $750,000 to replace. If it only goes to one residence, how do you justify replacing that? So let's learn today how to take care of what we've got so that our business model in our state maintains. So let's take a look at the state of North Dakota. If we were to look at just dark is a higher bridge level, dark being about 300 up to 300 bridges in a county to light being low. We have one county without any bridges, bridges being defined 20 and above. So you see that we have a great disparity across the state with the population density of bridges. And then when we look at the condition of the bridges, you'll see that, Kelly, if you would, you'll see that the poor, the red dots, they resonate in those areas where there are more bridges because their economies can't really help them replace and repair and take care of all those bridges. So it's the red and the yellow. The green is good, but the red and the yellow that we really need to focus on. Or is it the green too? That's what we want to learn today. That green, we also need to be doing things. We need to clean the deck. We need to treat the deck. We need to check underneath, remove stuff, and take care of the assets that we have. So where can we learn? Where can we pull information? And Kelly, if you would, the best site that we have that's completely transparent, Federal Highway, on the info bridge. Check it out, put it on your sites, pass it out. Everyone should know how to gain information from the info bridge. That's where all the bridge inspection data for all 20-foot and longer bridges resides. Wonderful piece of information. In North Dakota, we've also got a transportation learning network. That resonates through Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, and North Dakota, where you can learn all about taking care of the bridges. So if you missed a session, I'd encourage you to go back to a recorded session and learn so you know how to take care of those bridges. And then we have classes. In June, we're going to have a class on bridge maintenance. Bridge maintenance, and it's so important. I mentioned that there are 3,100 bridges in North Dakota. That's the bridges over 20 feet in length. We don't have any, sadly, we don't have any idea how many minor structures we have under 20 feet. People still die when those structures go down, and we don't know how many. We've got a long way to go. We're starting, we're working on it, but there are so many aspects with bridges that we really need to focus on, focus our energy and time. And so that's why today I'm so glad to partner with the TSP2 group and share a little bit about bridges to help us solve the problem so that North Dakota goes from 40th, almost at the bottom, back to the top where we belong. In South Dakota, so glad you're here, Greg, too, because you have the same mission. Before we get to you, Greg, though, Kelly, if you could share a little bit more about bridge repairs.
Yes, thank you, Dale. So I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to participate in a study that was involving innovative bridge design and repair concepts, and this was sponsored by the Soy Transportation Coalition. And I was on a team that developed a top 20 list of bridge design and repair concepts. The Transportation Coalition is based out of Ankeny, Iowa, and their administrative director is Mike Steenhoek. So this is their website, and their goal is to position the soybean industry stakeholders where they can benefit from a transportation system that delivers cost-effective, reliable, and competitive services. Primary reasons for the study is that there's a large backlog of bridges that need funding for replacement, repairs, rehabilitations. If funding was available, that would reduce the number of bridges that have load limitations on them and improve the safety of our transportation infrastructure. Goals of the study were to highlight current concepts that are working, create a top 20 list of design and repair concepts, and encourage innovative solutions. So the team members were Brian Kierleber from Buchanan County, Iowa, Pat Connor from Indiana LTAP, Andrew Peterson from South Dakota LTAP, and myself. So we reviewed various concepts and prioritized them. And then once our lists were completed, they were reviewed again by a team of 10 advisory panel members. The study was done last summer through the months of June, July, August primarily. And then wrap-up work was done in the fall. And then the final report was completed about the end of the year. And then this news release came out January 22nd to formally roll out the study. The report looks like this. So this particular page is featuring railroad flat car bridges. And each innovation, there's discussion on the cost estimates, the applications, the construction time saving, and comments on structural integrity. It also includes innovations for construction methods. For example, here is featuring vibratory H-pile drivers. The vibratory H-pile drivers mount on backhoes, run on the hydraulic system of that equipment, and then they use a PDA, a pile driving analysis tool, to determine when the pile has reached bearing. There's a top 10 bridge concept list shown here that's in the study. I won't go through every one of them to save a little bit of time here. And then the repairs list is listed here. So the entire study is posted on the North Dakota LTAP website, and it's under the bridge resource page section. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Greg Vavra, and he's got some information to share as well from South Dakota LTAP.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I reiterate what Dale said. We're somewhat in the same boat as North Dakota here in South Dakota. Local structures on the primary systems, a little over 3,900. You see about 25% of them are replacement eligible. We have nearly 100 closed. We have 25% again posted for weight. One good note, we have replaced 235 structures in the past 5 years. That's through the transportation program, our big program, we call it Bridge Improvement Grant Fund. We have others that are still out there putting structures in on their own, so they're not included in that. Pretty telling at the bottom, greater than 75 years, we still have 1,050 structures. Greater than 100, we still have 144. Back in 2016, I got involved with a project for funding on the small structure and large culverts. So this would be township and secondary roads. And here is anything 54 inches and above, but smaller than a bridge. So anything less than 20 feet between the undercopings. We did have 8, you'll see them in the white, that did not respond to the survey. And we don't know that the survey is really close, but we're talking about 3,200 structures on the primary or on the secondary system alone. And here's what we did in South Dakota by the decades. And you can see we built an awful lot of bridges, 50s, 60s, 70s. We're already way behind, and now as these become into play, we're going to see more and more bridges every year go into the poor and failed category. And just a couple quick slides here. Local government owned structures, and you can see eastern half of our state is loaded with these type of structures. We have the Jim and the Big Sioux and the Vermilion and the James. All those rivers are on the eastern half of the state. And we're in the same position with Dale. We've got some counties that have over 300 structures in their county. There's just a photo of the 75 years, gives you some idea where them are all at. Here's a posting of the weight restrictions. And, you know, when we go West River, there is some farm production, but we have a lot of rangeland west of the Missouri. But our heartland of our production is in the eastern half of the state, right where we have all the posted bridges. That is so detrimental to our local systems, because if we've got posted bridges out there, they find a secondary route or something to get out to a main highway. Now we're tearing up the township systems. They have no money to repair those systems. So it's a trickle-down effect with the weight restrictions. There's what's eligible for replacement right now. Kind of the same thing. Most of them are on the eastern half of the state, very concentrated along the Big Sioux and the Jim River. And there is our closed structures. This slide was a slide that I pulled. So there is a good number to look at. This slide was pulled from a 2016 presentation of just to give you some idea where we're closed at. At that time, we had 45 bridges closed. If you noticed in that first slide, and that was as of yesterday, we now have 93 closed. So in 5 years, we've closed an additional 48 structures. And there's just a small inventory of what we've done when we were looking at this, because we were looking at funding. How do we help the townships with the small structure and large culverts? I'm happy to say right now, just passed yesterday, There's going to be $6 million put in a fund that will be dispersed out to counties on a per structure basis to be used to help fund the townships in those areas. So that's going to really benefit and get a lot of those poor ones out of there. The downside of it is it's $6 million over the next 2 years, and we have no ongoing stream after that. So we're going to work hard here, try to figure out where to get some funding for the next, say, 10 years once this bill runs out. But at least it's a start, and we got our foot in the door with the legislature. So that's all I have here from South Dakota, but very similar picture to North Dakota.
Well, thank you for letting us share a little bit about North Dakota and South Dakota. And now we'd love to learn from you, Travis and Greg.
I would just like to say thank you for such a great introduction. I mean, some of the challenges that you have laid out really, it really just shows the challenge before us and the nation, right? North and South Dakota, you're not alone, right? The needs are greater than what you have resources to actually complete, right? And that goes around. We've been given this presentation across the country, this training. We have yet to have someone stop us and say, actually, we have a ton of money. We don't need this, right? We could just replace all the bridges as they come up. It's not a problem. Greg Freeman and I, Travis Kinney, we're going to go ahead and discuss a little bit on how to get out of this kind of vicious cycle and how to maximize our funds. My name's Travis Kinney. I'm with the TSP2 Bridge Preservation Partnership. Little background is I worked for Oregon DOT as the bridge maintenance engineer for about 10 years and have since moved on to the private side for a consulting firm. Greg Freeman, my co-speaker, works for Quick Bond Polymers and is active in, well, I think in just about all of the national preservation groups. We would both just like to say thank you for giving us a little time to come and talk here today. This is not a sales pitch. We don't have anything that we're offering to sell you guys today. It's just really trying to get the word out on bridge preservation and how it can help all of us. Overview of what we're going to talk about today. And overview is the key word, right? Because I have quite a few bullet points on the slide. The intent of this training is to give that high level perspective of bridge preservation. What is it and how can it fit within your asset management plan? And what benefits do you get from that? Since we're kind of glossing over a lot, very broad topic, we'll also be sure at the end of the presentation to point you towards a lot of additional resources. Many of them are free and available to anybody that wants to just go and learn more, to go ahead and get down into the weeds of actually taking that next step. What is the AASHTO TSP2 Bridge Preservation Program? Well, aside from just being a long acronym, the intent of this program is just simply to get information out on how to extend the useful life of bridges. It's a unique partnership because you have owners, industry, and academia all working together towards this common goal. I don't know that I've ever seen something quite set up the way that this is, where you can, as an owner, you could bring a problem to this partnership. I'm seeing this over and over my bridges, and you can have a variety of industry, folks that sell products, folks that create products, and folks that install products, and then other owners all kind of collaboratively help you with that solution. It really gets you out of that I'm trying to sell you my product and more into we're all working towards that answer to this problem. The way that the partnership works is there are annual meetings where we all can kind of congregate, and it's a conference format where you can do that presentations and meet with folks at booths and during the reception times. There's also monthly phone calls that take place where we're broken down by region, and there's usually like a technical topic that would be covered during those calls. And then kind of the other branch of the partnership are working groups, like the one that Greg and I chair, that focuses on local agencies. And again, all this is just trying to get more collaboration, I guess just get more information out on bridge preservation. So I mentioned working groups. That is, what Greg and I co-chair is this local agency outreach working group. When we looked through the larger TSP2 partnership, we recognized that state owners, federal FHWA, industry and academia were very well represented. And then at the local level, there would be participation, but at times it was spotty, and that it was a section that was specifically written into the bylaws of the TSP2 program that locals have a seat at the table, and that we just weren't really filling that well. And so we thought that a training would be a good way to get kind of that interaction going. And I think that it's important to stop and say that, so we are here providing some information. However, what I found is, as I have interacted with the locals across the country, and definitely on a more project specific level in Oregon, is that locals have a lot to bring to the table, right? So as I mentioned, that collaboration, locals agencies have figured out and have to stretch their resources in a number of ways, right? We know that many locals have to wear a lot of hats. You're not usually just responsible for your bridges, but you're responsible for your roads, you're responsible for your sewer systems, and I mean, there's just a lot of other factors that you have to engage in. And so it's a two-way street where the more we have in that collaboration, the more that we can kind of help benefit each other. Dale and Greg, you guys did, and Kelly, you guys all did a great job on overviewing some of the local agency inventory for North and South Dakota. This chart is specifically looking at from a national perspective. One thing to just kind of highlight here is that locals own about half of all the bridges in the country. And so it's not a inconsequential amount, right? I mean, there's a lot of the infrastructure that the public relies upon are owned and maintained by local agencies. And then this chart is showing the number of bridges along the vertical axis, and then along the horizontal axis is the age that the bridge was built. And the whole point of the TSP2 program is to just really come up with ideas and ways to, for low cost, extend how long these bridges stay in the green categories, right? You can see here, there are some bridges that are less than 10 years old that are already starting to be downgraded into a fair condition. That's just unacceptable. That can be poor construction practices or just poor maintenance. But those bridges are not going to see the life that we intended for them. I like that the reference to InfoBridge. I also use InfoBridge for my information. I like to say I steal it, but it's actually available to everybody, so it's not a hidden resource. But there's the link to it there, and this is just what I pulled up, a map of North and South Dakota, and there's about 3,000 bridges in good condition. So that's good news. These are the ones that we actually need to try and focus on from the means of preservation. The challenge with that is that when you look at the total number of bridges, right, there's 1,400 bridges in poor condition. And so I'm guessing the funding isn't available to replace 1,400 bridges in the very near future. And so this is where the conflict comes, where it's, if I can't fund all of my bad bridges, how can I divert funds to my good bridges? And it's this kind of a vicious cycle. So that's where an asset management plan really comes into play, to take a strategic look at how are we managing our inventory as a whole to eventually get that number of poor bridges down. Asset management plan, I love this comic, right? Here's your forest, here's your trees. Someone asks, where's the forest again? This has always been my reaction when folks are pushing asset management plans on me, is that it's hard to, when you're dealing with the day in and day out things right in front of your face, it's hard to take that step back and think of it from an asset management plan. What's our overall objective and how do we achieve it? And so over the years, I've begrudgingly really started to understand why these asset management plans are important, and then how you can actually leverage them to start taking care of your inventory in a different way. FHWA, of course, they have a fantastic definition of the asset management plan. Just kind of a highlight of it is, it's a strategic and systematic process of operating, maintaining, and improving physical assets. So a lot of times upper management kind of think that, I don't want to group all upper management together, but a lot of times there's this thought that an asset management plan is this, you input all your bridge conditions and you hit enter and it's going to spit out the list of what to do for the lowest cost. That's just not a reasonable expectation. But an asset management plan does give you that framework to start understanding how to go ahead and start tackling the inventory in a strategic and systematic way. And it's all really going after this goal. And the goal is to achieve that kind of desired state of good repair over the life cycle of our assets at a minimum practical cost, right? And so it's trying to get after that, how do you divvy up the funds in order to get towards that lowest cost possible to keep your inventory in a state of reasonable condition, right? When you hear that there's 93 bridges closed altogether, we missed our opportunities on those ones. Preservation is not going to help us anymore on a closed bridge, but it can help us slow the rate that they get to that closure. So asset management plan, I like to think of it as a three-legged stool, right? Without either of these or any of these legs, it falls over. So to have that strategic investment, you need to have replacements, right? I already said a closed bridge or a bridge in poor condition, it's not a good candidate for preservation. You got to come up with the funding to replace it and do it in a systematic way. Rehabilitation is that kind of mid-level where you're going to have a bridge that's in relatively bad condition, but it's worth in funding that large, project to actually improve the condition of the bridge to keep it in the inventory. And then there's the third leg of the stool, which is your preservation and preventative maintenance. So this is your routine maintenance. This is, as Dale was saying, this is your change in the oil of the car, right? This is how you keep the bridges running as long as you can without dropping into that need for rehabilitation, replacement, or even closure. So we'll kind of run through some of what those look like, right? Bridge replacements is actually, it's really intuitive to us. This is probably one of the most sought after actions, right? Especially when you have a big inventory of poor bridges, right? When your number of bad bridges exceeds your funding, a lot of times the easiest decision is to just say, I'm going to put all the money I have available to get as many of those worst bridges off the list as I can. You get a bridge that was in poor condition or closed, and then it comes back into the inventory in good condition, right? So you see that immediate jump in your bridge condition rating. But the problem is you missed out on some opportunities on the other end. And so this desire to focus our funding on this need that we don't have enough resources to achieve is really kind of coined as a worst first approach, right? Having the worst bridge on the block is actually advantageous because then you might get the funding for the replacement that's needed. The downside is this is also the most expensive of any of the actions that you could possibly do to your bridge, right? Replacement's going to be way more expensive than anything else. It's the most disruptive action, and until you get a replacement in place, it causes the biggest drain on maintenance resources. Right? If you have a bridge that is in very poor condition and closing it is not an option, you have to dedicate a lot of maintenance in order to keep that bridge open until you can fund that replacement. Bridge rehabilitation, that's that in-between level, right? This is the bridges that they're really still serving their purpose. They're not having scour problems. They're tall enough for the loads going under it, and they're strong enough for the load postings and wide enough to carry all the vehicles, where if the bridge is in poor condition, but everything else, the size, footprint of it makes sense, then maybe rehabilitation is a good option. These tend to be fairly high cost projects. And in a lot of states, as you start staring down the actual cost of a replacement or rehabilitation, and you compare it to the cost of replacement, it can start to look really advantageous. Say, well, we just need that other 30 or 40% of the total cost, and we will get a brand new bridge instead of a rehabilitated one. And then bridge preservation. These are just actions and strategies that prevent, delay, or reduce deterioration of bridges. So the intent of preservation in this routine maintenance activities is just to stop the bridge where it's at now. So it's not a ribbon cutting where you get that brand new shiny bridge. It is just basically freeze everything in time. This is the challenge with preservation, is that if you do all preservation, at best, your bridge conditions won't change, right? So you don't get that very poor bridge shifting from that category to a good condition. And so it's kind of hard to sell at times as to why would you want to go ahead and do this action. And really, it's having to take that next step of saying, well, I'm not looking at the benefit from today, I'm looking at the benefit in 10 years, right? What did that action do 10 years from now, and how did that benefit my inventory? And the reason why we want to look at this is it's the cheapest of all the actions, right? Very inexpensive, and we're looking at like short-term traffic control kind of setups. Kind of to hammer in a little more on rehabilitation versus preservation, like to focus in on bridge decks. Bridge decks are a good one to focus on because they're the highest value component of a bridge for most bridges. They're also the highest risk element for deterioration, right? These are where you have your, if you have chain traffic from snow operations, this is where you have your de-icing salts. I know North Dakota, you guys are using a salt brine solution, right? So this is where you're really kind of hitting that deck hard. It's the cover of the bridge, and so it's seeing all of the rain and snow and the freeze-thaw cycles. I mean, it's really just the element that gets beat up the most. It's also the part of the bridge that the public sees the most. And so if you have spalling and potholing in your bridge deck, that's what they call about. If you have some problems with a bearing or a girder, you may not actually get a phone call on that because they're not seeing it. Bridge rehabilitation, so bridge deck rehabilitation. So it's a fairly destructive operation, right? Usually if you're getting to the point where your bridge deck has gotten so poor that you have to rehabilitate it, you're talking concrete removal and lots of it. So you can see here, they're going through and they're rubbleizing, grinding off a layer of the concrete at the top. They'll have to pour back a cementitious or structural overlay to go ahead and make up for that removed section. A lot of times this is the case where you start to get salts and chlorides down to the rebar level. And once you get to a certain concentration there, you can just start having your whole deck start kind of coming apart on you. And the only real solution to it is to either replace the whole deck or at least remove that contaminated concrete and then re-pour. And so fairly high cost, depending on what your traffic volumes are on the structure, it can end up leading to very high just staging cost, whereas you're moving traffic around to accommodate for the work, it becomes higher. You have to set up a detour. I recently did a rehabilitation in Oregon, and the detour cost was like 40% of the total project cost. And that just doesn't make me feel good when your actual funding isn't going to bid items that are either labor or materials that are going into the bridge deck, but it's going into just getting access to do the work.
This particular bridge was supposed to be a minor patching project, and Info Bridge is part of the long-term bridge program. And so last week I was on 4 different calls talking about trying to figure out ways which state and local agencies can figure out what's really going on to the bridge. You send someone out there to do an inspection, you don't always know. So when you take a picture of the state of your bridges based on inspection data, this bridge is a perfect example. So, they scoped out some patching and they were going to put a thin overlay on it. But what happened is when they got out there, they realized that 70% of the bridge was delaminating. And so often what might be preservation activities turns into rehabilitation. The whole idea of what we think it's going to cost to do the kind of repairs that we have scoped gets blown out. So particularly the bridge was just supposed to be a patch job.
Rehabilitation, right? Pretty invasive. This is what preservation looks like. I love these two pictures contrasting. I need to put them on the same slide, but here you have a crew with squeegees and a couple cones set up. Here you have a structure that's probably closed and you're doing some significant work. Deck preservation. This is often looked at as either doing some kind of a sealer to the deck or applying a thin overlay or thin membrane kind of a system to do a barrier between the salts, the water, and everything else that's trying to get down into your bridge deck. So again, short-term traffic control, fairly inexpensive activity. The problem with doing this work, right? This is really easy work to do, but you're probably not getting phone calls on this bridge deck, right? No one's complaining about it yet. And so it's that, I can do this very easy activity that'll buy me years from my bridge deck reaching the need for this, but it's a matter of convincing our maintenance and having our asset management plans there to back it up to go ahead and start focusing some of our efforts on this very low cost activity, being focused on our good and fair condition assets so that we can extend it. The challenge with bridge preservation continues to be communicating the benefit. So the benefit is really easy to understand, but it gets much more difficult to quantify. Everyone can understand the idea, I should be taking care of our assets, right? Through this routine maintenance and these low cost preservation activities. We can conceptually communicate that well. But more and more, there's these performance measures that are coming out that where money starts being tied to what can you show this does. And so I can tell you that if you seal up a deck that's in good condition so that the salts and chlorides aren't getting down to your rebar, that you will extend the life of that deck. There's no question about it. However, the question comes into is how many years? Do you get 5 years? Do you get 10? You get 15, 12 and a half, right? As you start getting into these performance measures that start driving some of our decision making, it becomes much harder to kind of go ahead and continue to educate and convey the benefit of preservation. And honestly, the effectiveness of any treatment depends on a lot of factors, right? What's that bridge being subjected to from a climate standpoint? What kind of structure type is it? You know, do you have a very thin deck that's going to be cracking underneath traffic loads? Or do you have a newer structure that it just cracked a lot when it was built? You know, a lot of states report issues with shrinkage cracking, brand new bridge cracking all throughout after the first year or two of construction. So it's still in serviceable condition, but if you don't get in and seal up those cracks, it'll take a quick trip down that condition slide towards that fair and then poor condition relatively quickly. What's the condition of the structure when you do the treatment, and what kind of preservation treatment? So there's a lot of factors that go into it. I will tell you there's a lot of people that are working on a national scale that are much smarter than I, that are working on actually being able to come up with a better way of quantifying, you know, that benefit, including all these factors into that preservation treatment. I like a little bit more simplistic approach. I like to kind of just use an analogy instead to help communicate the benefits of preservation. And a car is a great analogy to use because most of the public doesn't understand the exact benefit of all the treatments they do to their car, but they do understand that it's something that they should be doing. And there's risks to deferring that work, right? So with a car, some of your preservation, right, or routine maintenance is going to be changing the oil, you know, washing the car, rotating your tires, and getting your transmission serviced. Anyone in the general public will understand that if you just say, well, I'm just never changing my oil. It is a choice you can make as an owner. However, you are going to eventually have to rebuild that engine. I can't tell you if it's going to be after 20,000 miles or 40,000 miles or exactly the number, but I can tell you that, you know, and any mechanic can tell them that if you don't do it on some regular cycle, you don't maintain that vehicle, it's going to drop down that condition sooner than you would have otherwise. And most people understand that the cost of rebuilding that engine is very high and the cost of oil changes is very low. And so we'll do the oil changes. Same thing when it comes to washing your car, you know, removing all that debris and contaminants from the body of the car. We can conceptually understand if I just refuse to ever wash the car, I'm going to end up having to do some body work and repainting on that car much sooner than if I took care of it. And you kind of go down through the list. And so I find that the car analogy really helps kind of reach out to not just the public, but also to some policymakers that may not quite understand that, you know, why would you want to do preservation when you could fund all your money into very limited replacements and have the ribbon cuttings?
You mentioned, you know, going to legislature, and I think Greg or somebody mentioned that, as well as getting that $6 million. That picture on the bottom left, this is a state example, but I've seen this starting to happen more on a local level. About 12 or 13 years ago in the state of Utah, this guy, Dave Eisenberger, who was a state bridge engineer, was trying to figure out a way to go to legislature. They only were getting about $2 million for the whole state for preservation. And they saw the value in preservation. And so they went to the legislature. And, you know, as you mentioned, it's hard to quantify the value of preservation, but they got creative and came up with a way, and they went from $2 million to $12 million. Even though it's a state example, the value of doing this preemptive work is so much more cost effective if you lay it out there for legislature. They tend to want to wake up and get ahead of the game. And both North and South Dakota are both in a position right now where it's going to be hard to catch up right now unless you really consider the value and take that message to the legislature as we're trying to.
And the timing for when you do this preservation is important, right? Once you get to the point of your engine seized up, your oil change is no longer an option anymore, right? You can't wait for it to get to that point of falling off the cliff where then you go, okay, I got it. I'll start doing my preservation work now, right? You have to do it while your car is still running. So same thing with the bridges is you have to target those bridges that are in good condition in order to keep them in that good condition. Keep mentioning preservation, preservation, preservation. And so just a quick break on, you know, what am I talking about? So I am specifically talking about deck treatments. I'm talking about things that seal up that bridge deck and keep that salt brine out. Your concrete parapets, anywhere that salt brine's getting to, trying to keep that concrete sealed. I'm talking about washing the contaminants off the bridges. I'm talking about keeping our joints watertight so those contaminants aren't getting down through the deck and onto the girders and the beam seats and the bearings. I'm talking about protecting our steel structures, right? And our steel structures need to be taken care of as well. They need to have their paint systems maintained. I'm talking about patching up their concrete as it gets spalled off. And I'm talking about including membranes with asphalt so that you can keep the, again, just keeping out the contaminants is the key. As we start talking about, okay, so what are some candidates for preservation? And they really kind of fall into a few categories. You have your high value bridges. If you have a structure that you can't either from a political standpoint or from a funding standpoint afford to replace it, that is a really good clue to you that it is a great candidate for preservation. Being from Oregon, I'm going to highlight this one. It's the Dakota Bridge in Coos Bay, Oregon. It's 5,300 feet in length. It was constructed in 1936. This bridge logo is on everything in this community. Whether you're a car detailing company or a florist, they all have this bridge on their logo. It is very important to that community. So this is an extreme example, but just something to think about. If you have a structure in your inventory that you just can't fathom the replacement of it, then boy, that is a great indication that you need to do anything you can to preserve it, because your only other option is rehabilitation, which is fairly expensive. Much more common category, as I've been mentioning, is bridges that are in good condition, right? Your ones that haven't already fallen off that cliff. And so this chart shows your bridge condition along the vertical axis, and then the time of the bridge in service along that horizontal axis. And so the way that bridges tend to deteriorate is they kind of hold that good condition for the first length of their life. And then as they start to have that deterioration take place, they start reaching that critical threshold for the steel to start rusting and spalling off concrete. The deterioration happens rapidly, right? And so you kind of fall down that curve and you start to drive down quickly. This kind of has a breakdown into categories. Note that there's overlap, right? Nothing's 100% clear cut. There are bridges in fair condition that are definitely good candidates for preservation. However, there's also bridges in fair condition that are heading towards a replacement. And so you have to look at each candidate specifically, but this is a very good first cut, is to start looking at, which one of my bridges are in good condition, which ones are unfair, and start looking at your preservation program from there. As you start looking at that data, InfoBridge was brought up. Any structure that's 20 feet in length gets documented as part of the National Bridge Inspection Data Requirements. So this is very useful information. The good, fair, poor, that's all talking about in the deck super sub NBI rating. They're very good and useful pieces of information, but they really kind of bundle a whole lot of the bridge into one number. That's good for that first cut. If it's the only information you have available, then that's okay. However, recently there's been changes where element level data is required as part of this NBI inspection. And as you get into that element level data, you can really start to draw into, okay, what is it about the deck that has it down to a fair rating, or what's going on with the substructure and the superstructure. You can get into the defects, right? Oh, it's got a lot of cracking on it, or it's got a lot of spalling, things that'll help clue you into what kind of preservation treatment would make sense. So as you start to look at what kind of bridges you have available to you that would be good candidates for preservation, you need to look at how to develop a project. And so a lot of these actions are easy to implement with in-house forces. I've seen presentations where inmate crews have been used to do deck overlays, where there was a local agency, I think it was out of Washington. He didn't have a crew, not a roadway crew, not a bridge crew. He didn't have any crew, but he was able to get his hands on a little bit of money and went and hired an inmate crew to go and do the installation. And there was information and tools available to him that he was able to get in touch with, to have a clear understanding of how to do the work and how to do it successfully, and how to do it with those forces that weren't highly trained, didn't have specialized equipment. They just made it happen. This work also goes well for contracted work, right? There's a lot of preservation actions that can be contracted. It's typically not high overhead from that plans and development standpoint. They can be done very efficiently. Thing to really pay attention to if you're looking at contracting your work is to take a broad swath of what you're looking at and think about bundling the work together to make it advantageous for your contractors. It's kind of a quick ballpark number. If you're doing like a kind of a lower cost epoxy sealer, sealing up a bridge deck, and looking at a 5,000 square foot deck, it might only be about $10,000 worth of materials and labor to complete that work. So that's a pretty small contract if you're going to try and get a contractor to go after that. And so they might give you their, I don't really want to do this work, but I'll do it for this price bid. So if you start seeing, start thinking about contracting this, look around and think about how you can bundle this together to make it so that you get competitive bids for this work.
This picture is just a small crew, and when I was more involved sales on bridges a lot, I would go out and work with small crews, and we teach them how to, and as we were doing in this picture, teaching this little crew how to mix up epoxy, patching mortar, and do these repairs. And a lot of our industry partners are more than happy to go out and work with, local agency crews and teach them how to use various technologies, whether it be sealers, maintaining joints, whatever. They're really enthusiastic about supporting any interested parties that want to learn how to use these various kinds of technologies and products.
100% agree, Greg. From interacting with industry folks within the partnership, I know that they are very interested in seeing their product work well. So they have developed installation guides. Many of them have developed the videos showing the installation, and then often they are willing to come out and be on the bridge deck with you to help you do the installation right. All too often they understand that if a good product is installed incorrectly, it can fail prematurely, and that agency will likely never touch the product again. Funding the work, right? I can convince you that preservation is a good idea, and I can help you through the process of how to put a contract together. If you can't pay for it, then you have some challenges, right? So the good news is that the feds are on board. So the Moving Ahead for Progress, MAP 21, and the FAST Act, they all recognize the benefits of preservation and have made federal funding available for this work. I will say that, there's a survey I'm going to hit here in a couple slides where we've talked about it and said that, we understand that either at the state kind of asset management or project selection process may not favor preservation work with federal funds, right? Some of that bigger pools of money, they might be really focused towards that worst first project selection. But from the Fed standpoint, the money's there. And so if there's really strings tied to where you can't get your hands on it for any preservation work, I would strongly encourage you to look into why that is. Activities that are eligible. These next few slides are all coming out of the FHWA Bridge Preservation Guide. It's a really good document. And in fact, I've had a few other graphs throughout here that have been pulled from that reference. It does two things. One is it's not a 4,000 page guide that's impossible to use. It's actually very short and it's concise with the content that it has. It really lays out a lot of what you need from a preservation standpoint. And it carries weight with it of FHWA, where you can take it to others and say, look, this is what they're telling us to do with their funds. Here's some examples of cyclical maintenance activity. So, you're cleaning and washing bridges. This is stuff where you're not, there's nothing that you're seeing on the bridge deck. This is stuff that you're going to go ahead and try and make a goal for, every year we're going to go and clean this bridge deck or flush these drains, or every 2 years or every 6 months, depending on your location. And then there's some condition-based activities. So this is where you're actually going and correcting something that needs to be addressed. So this is going to get into more of your, you have a failed joint seal. So you're going to go in there and replace it. Or your drains are damaged, or your steel members have repair. But you can see here, this is a long list, right? There's a lot of activities that per the feds are available for preservation funding, down to movable bridges, deck overlays, electrochemical extraction. I'll have to admit, I have not had the pleasure of using that, but we do have cathodic protection in Oregon. And the list continues onto this one where you get into scour, pile preservation. I keep talking about decks over and over, but there's a lot of your structure that requires a thought in how you take care of it. It's been a little while now, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, we sent out a survey to a lot of our local agency contacts within our working group. LTAP members were very supportive of helping us get this out. We had 500 responses from local agency owners, and it was really just trying to get a bead on what's happening at the local level for preservation. And you can see from this pie chart, there's a lot, right? 76% of local agencies responded, yes, we are doing some form of preservation. So they looked through those lists that we just went through and said, yep, we're doing some of that. So that's encouraging. That means that we're working on some of that routine maintenance. You got a quarter of folks that responded that they are unable to do any of that at this time.
I wanted to back up so these folks understand, because actually you were a big part of this, the Federal Highway Bridge Preservation Expert Task Group. When we were both involved with that, we went to them and said, hey, we're giving these presentations, but these local folks aren't able to access funds. The folks at the federal highway level were a little confused because they thought that federal money was a little more easily accessible than it was. And so what they agreed to do is fund a case study. And so this survey is part of this case study that is going to ultimately, hopefully, make it easier for local agency folks to access funding in the long term. And so I think it's going to be a great resource.
That's an ongoing initiative, and that's really what it was being driven about. Is we went to develop these slides and start showing a lot of examples of how to get your hands on state and federal funds for this preservation work. It found that when we're looking at our respondents, there wasn't a ton that are saying that they're doing it, but there are examples out there, and that case study that Greg mentioned is pulling that information together, and it'll be something that we'll definitely get back out to folks as soon as it's done. These are lower cost activities in the grand scheme of things. And so there's a lot of local agencies that are carving out some of their own funding from either bonds or local taxes, where they're able to generate their own revenue and accomplish some preservation work. Looking at that, you have the 3 different options for an asset management plan: replacement, rehab, and preservation. You can see that from total spending, percent of your total funds, how much of it goes to preservation. We're pretty heavy on the left side of this graph, right? We're gonna focus the bulk of our funds on some other activities, and then we're gonna fund some preservation work and carving out a smaller number. There isn't a magic number of how much funding or what percentage of your funding you should be dedicating towards preservation. It depends a lot on your inventory, right? If every bridge in your inventory was in poor condition, I'd tell you don't worry about preservation. Fortunately, I haven't come across anyone that's had all of their bridges in bad shape, right? There's this different ranges of how many are in that poor condition. But it's that taking that action to really carve out just a little bit of funds or what you can do and start taking those steps. So again, as we've been doing our surveys and reaching out, we do tend to find that replacement or rehabilitation projects tend to be prioritized over preservation, especially when you're looking at that next phase, that next tier of funding levels. And you start getting into the state and federal funds, smaller preservation projects just tend to have a hard time competing well. I know I've heard a lot of states, and Oregon's one of them, where sufficiency rating is a big factor in selection of those larger, that statewide transportation funds. And so if a sufficiency number is a big driver of it, that means that that's really working against preservation projects, because you're trying to target good bridges with preservation. And so if I would strongly encourage you to look through and think about what is our selection process for getting access to those funds, and is it set up so that we can carve off some funds for preservation work? And if the answer is no, then you need to think about, can you change it, or do you have local funding available to be able to take care of some of your preservation needs? A preservation program, right, is a component of that asset management plan. This wheel kind of development chart is from the FHWA Bridge Preservation Guide, and it's very thorough. You can see there's an 11-step process to kind of track through. We've actually already covered quite a bit of this as we talked about, looking for candidates for preservation and what kind of actions you could do. Some of the things that we haven't discussed yet that are worth going over in this overview is looking at some objectives. What are your goals, right? If you're going to set up an asset management plan to achieve a desired state, you have to say, what is that state? What are we trying to do that we're then allocating our funds to make that happen? So some of the easy ones that can be done is just look at your cyclical maintenance activities, these things that just happen on a routine basis, and say, okay, well, this could be one of our goals. We could say that we want to, do crack sealing on our bridges every 3 to 5 years, and that's something that's not hard to document and then report back on. Yep, we're achieving that goal. Or sometimes it's important to set a goal that's realistic, but that maybe you don't have the funding yet to achieve, and then you can start reporting. Nope, we are not able to make that deck sealing goal of every 3 to 5 years. We think that's a reasonable number to keep our inventory in good state, but we just don't have the funding. And you start reporting that, hey, we are not meeting this objective, right? If you can defend the goal and you can defend the desire to do the work, then it can start to be at least reported as something that is not happening, and then funding's the issue. You set your goals, measure the benefits. So again, one of the challenges with a lot of preservation activity is that it slows the rate of deterioration. You need time in order to actually measure your benefit. This graph is one representation of something that could be used to try and start showing that benefit, where that dashed line to the left shows a typical deterioration rate for a bridge, and then through preservation, you're shallowing up that drop off, and you're starting to extend the life of the structure. And maybe as it's in that fair condition, you do some timely condition-based maintenance. Maybe you do an overlay or on the bridge, and you get a little bit of a bump in condition, and you can continue that curve out. When you get down to the bottom here, you can measure, this is the time we thought the bridge, what its service life was intended to be, and the service life we got it to. And that measured increase is the benefit of that routine maintenance, that preservation activity. Even a simpler way, and I love this chart, it's one that I think a lot of folks have used, and it just kind of shows the flow of bridges in the inventory from that good, fair, poor. And so you just kind of show that, as the bridges go down in condition, you put the number of, I had 400 bridges go to fair condition this year. I had 12 bridges go into poor condition. And then along the bottom axis, you show which ones are moving up. And, for a sustainable program, those two directions should balance each other. And where preservation really comes in is in really reducing the number of bridges going from this good to fair and the fair to poor, right? We're really trying to slow the tide of bridges going to the right, so that we can hopefully start getting caught up on the bridges that need to head back to the left. Michigan, the state of Michigan, had a great case study where they actually had time. They've been documenting this since '98. And were able to share it with us, and this is what they're using for their legislature to show this is how we've measured the benefit of preservation. So back in 1998, Michigan passed the gas tax increase, and they actually earmarked some funding for preservation. The axis along the bottom is the year, and then the vertical axis is the number of bridges that are falling into poor condition that year, reading that structurally deficient category. So you can see in '98, they had almost 140 bridges drop into poor condition, make that last step of the graph into poor. And so they said, okay, we need to start slowing this tide. Let's see how and start tracking it. And so you can see over time, as they've been allocating and having dedicated preservation funding, they have dropped this chart down so that you've reached this much lower state of bridges reaching that poor condition. They've used this tracking and this reporting so that now they've dedicated 30% of their total bridge program budget towards maintaining and preserving their bridges, right? So they're really shifted away from that. Okay, we're only gonna, when you see this graph, it could be very easy to say, I'm gonna dedicate every dime I have towards those bridges that have hit poor condition and try and take care of them. But what Michigan did is they said, okay, we need to start slowing this rate down because this is not sustainable. And so that's how they made this work. So it's just a really good case study. So we've talked a lot about preservation, the benefits of it, and the actual setting up a program of it. Let's run through what are we talking about with these treatments. Okay, what are some of these things look like? And again, high level overview. After this, I'm going to show you where there's a lot of resources that are available to get really down into the weeds of the work. But the simplest of all the actions, cleaning and washing. Real benefit is you are just flushing it, and washing reduces the potential of chloride intrusion in your bridge deck. It's essential for proper joint and bearing movement, and it extends the life of steel coating systems, right? It just gets off the contaminants. The things to kind of focus on when you're doing it, right? I mean, certainly if you can wash the whole bridge, that's great. There's some certain spots that you should prioritize with your limited resources. Decks, your joints, your curbs, your rails, the stuff that are getting that exposure to the salt and the direct exposure to the elements. Your abutments, your beam seats, and your bearings are going to be your next kind of phase to target in on. I have yet to find anyone that has kept all of their joints watertight, right? And so that's why your abutments, beam seats, and bearings are important, is because inevitably those joints end up leaking at some point in their life, and then you kind of focus all the contaminants, run down the bridge and onto those beam seats and bearings. So getting in there and cleaning those on some kind of a regular cycle is very important. And then kind of your next tier there is, as that water splashes down on your beam seats, it'll splash onto your beam ends, truss members, and your end diaphragms of steel beams. Those are all things to kind of pay attention to. Things to consider, right? As a bearing or a planter box. Things to consider is following your state and federal regulations, right? There's going to be some materials that are on your bridge that are going to be considered hazardous. And so this was actually a huge thing for a lot of agencies, where environmental regulations for dealing with those potentially hazardous materials ended up being, you need 100% containment of all waste water. So that pretty much limits your ability to do any washing. It just becomes cost prohibitive to set up that kind of a containment system. Certainly for the substructure, for your bridge deck, it's a lot easier to kind of block off some of the drains, but certainly for the substructure bearings like this, you just can't do it. Washington DOT did a great thing, and they shared it through the bridge partnership, where they said, okay, we're going to follow some best practices, okay, and we're going to fund a research project for you to go out and see if these best practices are reasonable. So some of the things that they said they would do is, okay, something like this bearing, we'll clean it up first, right? We'll remove a lot of this with sweeping and removing the large debris by hand and bag it and throw it away. Okay, so we won't just go and flush something like this into the water. Then we're going to wait for high water event. So when you're in your winter months, when you have a lot of flow in the rivers, there's already a lot of debris in the rivers, and adding a little bit of extra may not be a big deal. And they said, and once we get to this point, we're going to go ahead and do it on a regular cycle, so we're not having to do it. They funded it. They said, measure the contamination upstream, measure it downstream, see if we can find a difference. They could not. And so based on that research that was done out of Washington, I grabbed it from Oregon. I know other states have grabbed it as well and said, we're setting up a washing program, and we're referencing back to the best practices that were developed by one of our sister agencies to use that. Concrete sealing, right? They've been hitting on this over and over. This is why you want to seal it, right? You have your chlorides, your air, your acids, your water, you have everything trying to get down through that protective concrete layer to your reinforcing steel. And that's really the problem, is once it gets down to the reinforcing steel, it can generate some corrosion. Corrosion expands to a tremendous amount, and it just pops the concrete off the cover.
We had two questions, one regarding how much concrete cover, is it advantageous to have more concrete cover over the reinforcing steel? And one question about how long it takes for the corrosion process of the reinforcing steel to take place with the use of de-icing chemicals. So I did provide some short answers, but this is a perfect slide that shows that process. There's a lot of variability, but you can see there's some cover over the steel, there's cracking, there's freeze thaw, there's de-icing chemicals.
Yeah, and regarding the cover, I mean, so more cover is better. New construction generally has a sufficient cover, several inches, where you're going to have that benefit of it not, chlorides aren't going to diffuse through the concrete as fast. Cracks are a big one, where if you can seal up those cracks to avoid that direct, kind of like think of them like as highways for the contaminants to get direct access to the steel, makes a difference. The rate, so how much chloride you put down on the deck can make a difference. I had one bridge deck in Oregon where one lane of it was completely blowing apart, and the other lane was in great shape. So same bridge, depending on which direction of traffic it was. What we found out is there was a refilling station for the winter maintenance to refill their chloride tanks. In Oregon, we use mag chloride for liquid de-icing. And so on their way to the tank, they were empty and they didn't hit that side of the bridge. On the way out, they were full and they hit the bridge every time. And so one lane of the bridge was completely destroyed and the other lane was totally fine. And so it was really a matter of, well, how hard are you hitting that bridge deck? So there's a lot of tools that are out there to try and help you quantify, specifically for bridge deck. TSP2 program actually put together a bridge deck chloride testing guide that goes through and talks about a lot of the different things to think about as you want to start looking at which bridges should you start sampling, because you can actually take a core and sample that concrete and say, okay, we're at this level, and so we're still okay. Or we're getting really close. We need to do something now. I'll show you the TSP2 website here as we get later in the slides, and you'll be able to find that document on there, but it's a really good resource. But like with everything in preservation, I guess I would just say there's a lot of factors. But the one thing that helps all of those factors is seal it. So there's a lot of different types of sealers that are out there that have different properties for keeping those salts and chlorides out. These penetrating sealers, you can see they're very easy to install. There's a spray bar that's being putting it down there. And these, silanes, sioxalanes, siliconates, these are all stuff that actually absorb down into the concrete and make it hydrophobic, so that the water or the concrete itself is now actually repelling water. So they're not a crack filler, but they're stopping that diffusion that goes straight through the concrete. General rule of thumb is maybe reapply it on a 5 to 10 year cycle. And this next slide really kind of shows what I'm talking about, that hydrophobic, where the concrete block on the left has been treated with one of these penetrating sealers, and the concrete block on the right has not been. And so you can just see that this kind of a waterfall station set up at this booth, but the block on this left, the concrete's staying dry. It's not absorbing down into it, where on the right, that block is saturating and it's starting to diffuse whatever's in that water down into the concrete. There are also sealers out there that are really just specifically targeting the crack fillers. There's a lot of like epoxies and methacrylates that are out there where you're going after those kind of avenues for the salts to get right down to the rebar. Same kind of objective. You're just really trying to keep and slow down how quickly those contaminants can get to the reinforcing steel. These are most effective when they're placed early after initial shrinkage and cracking. So especially on your brand new bridge decks, you just kind of hear it across the country where there is a problem. As we go to these really high performance concretes, they crack. So they're really hard, really strong, but also kind of brittle. So they usually go through this shrinkage crack problem. And so a lot of states have adopted where contractors are required to seal it even before they leave either a new overlay, concrete overlay, or a new deck construction. Other states are coming back just a few years after they're built. And again, it's kind of that hard. I just built a brand new bridge and now I'm going to invest in maintenance on that bridge. I just built it. Shouldn't I be able to leave it alone for a while? And the answer is usually no. You have to stay on top of those ones so that you can get the life that you wanted out of that replacement. That's sealing the concrete. You can actually make a barrier on top of the concrete as well. Certainly there's the concrete kind of overlays that are more of a structural. I would consider those to be more of a rehabilitation category. There's these thin polymer overlay systems that are also available. They're ultra low permeability, and they make a barrier and a new wearing surface on top of the deck so that no contaminants are working their way through. Properly installed on a bridge deck, you're still looking at decks that are in good condition. These are a very cost-effective way to extend the life of the bridge deck. I found that the public likes them because it looks like it's shiny and new on top of the deck, even though it's a relatively thin overlay system. Costs are quite low compared to other protective overlay systems. They're very easy to install with crews. You can see the way that they go down is there's some folks that are working out in front of the aggregate there where they're squeegeeing out, use like a notched squeegee to get a layer of epoxy resin down on the deck, and then they broadcast aggregate into it. The aggregate gives you an abrasion resistance and a skid resistance to the deck. Then you go back over that first coat with another layer of squeegeeing the material, that epoxy resin onto it, and then broadcast the aggregate again. When you're all said and done, you're about 3/8 of an inch in thickness. I don't have a number on here, Greg, for how long we think these last, but certainly studded tire use in Oregon has taken some of these out of service a little earlier than we would have liked, but generally I would put them into that 10 to 15 year range, 12 to 15 years.
One thing I'll say is that if the deck is in fairly decent shape, they appear to last a lot longer. So if you wait until you've got a lot of patching and delamination and heavy chloride exposure for many years, they don't last as long.
In Oregon, we do a lot of these, both with in-house and contracted forces, and we're usually in that $4 or $5 a square foot range for this kind of a product. I will say that the aggregate makes a big difference in how long your abrasion lasts, right? A durable hard aggregate will last much longer than if you have a very soft aggregate in that layer. This photo here, it just kind of shows, you can see a short-term traffic control. So they went prepped one side, put down the overlay, they'll flip this over and do the other side. It's kind of thing you can do in just short shifts, that smaller windows, short-term traffic control. Good candidates for either in-house or contracted forces. Probably 3 different popular types of membranes. Polyurea is kind of, think of it like a rhino liner. There's epoxy and then fabric rolled. Fabric applied membranes are very common. And you basically just roll them out. This one has an adhesive backing. You can see them pulling off. Do your lap splices, put your asphalt on top, and you have a durable system. The thing that it's important to pay attention to is asphalt alone is not a protective system. Okay, think of it more like a big sponge. Right? It's a very porous material, and so it can actually hold the salt and contaminate it on top of that concrete deck for longer. It does help you against abrasion, right? You're not directly impacting the deck, and so it can help from that standpoint. But as far as saving you from water and salts getting down to your rebar, it doesn't do it. So you have to include some kind of a membrane system with that asphalt. Of course, joint systems, these tend to be kind of the whipping boy of the preservation world, where it's hard to keep joint systems watertight, right? They tend to fail and get neglected, but it does not mean that there aren't products out there that work well, and it does not mean that they're not something that should be focused on. Joints are necessary to allow that movement of the bridge, and there's some common ones out there, right? Asphaltic plug joints, compression seals and bonded joint systems, pourable joints, sliding plate joints, and strip seal or armored joints. There's a small movement guide that's available. I think it might be on the TSP2 website as well, where it runs through just a lot of what these joints are. And actually, that's where I borrowed some of this information from, and how to do the proper maintenance and repairs of them. They all have the same objective: to allow the bridge to move and to protect the traveling public as they ride over the top of it. Right? Especially as you have the headers start to break out, you can have some real traffic safety hazards. Here's a slide where they're going through and replacing a strip seal. Getting those glands in place can be challenging, but they tend to be very durable systems. Example of a poured joint, where it's a 2-part pourable sealant. So you put a backer rod in. These are typically pretty small movement joints. I would say with these, more is not better. Sometimes you can get these where they really kind of put them on very thick, where they weren't intended for that. And so instead of stretching to allow the movement, they just pull off from the side of the bridge. And so with any of these products, definitely recommend pay attention to the manufacturer. Maintenance painting. Painting systems are, of course, there to protect our steel bridges. And spot painting is a very important tool that can extend the service life of the overall painting system. So when I say maintenance painting, I'm not really referring to that full removal and overcoat. Those are pretty big projects. They're certainly in the world of preservation, but they're not really in the world of maintenance. And that with paints, the vast majority of the ones that are out there, they have lead paint in them. So pay very close attention to your worker safety environmental regulations. Here's some examples of where you would want to focus in on maintenance painting, where you have this localized failure, where you had some mill scale that wasn't prepped properly, and so you have some paint coming off in a localized area. You can get in there, you can repair this area and keep it from causing the overall paint system to fail. Here you have a failure between the 2 different paint systems on the right, an inner coat failure. The person on the left, they're using what's called a vacuum shrouded grinder. They have their vacuum on their backpack. These are very, very useful tools from a containment standpoint and from a worker safety standpoint, where instead of full enclosures for these lead-based paint systems, with some of these tools, you can use them as a lot of your protective system. So again, pay close attention to your local requirements. But if you're not familiar with vacuum shrouded grinders, vacuum shrouded needle guns, I think they're actually coming out with vacuum shrouded just about everything, with a lot of the silica regulations out there now, where it is a very popular means of control, where you can control it right at the source, as opposed to trying to set up a massive containment around everything. With paint systems, prep is key. I got in an argument with one of our paint experts, where they basically said, if our maintenance is not willing to do any prep or proper prep, don't worry about painting at all, because doing just paint over the top of failing paint will fail just as fast as if you didn't touch it. Good practices. Thicker is not always better. Listen to the manufacturer. Sometimes you can have paint fail by actually putting it on too thick of a coat. Concrete patching, corrosion of rebar, freeze thaw, good practices for concrete patching, of course, something that can be done with in-house forces. You want to go through and make sure you have some a decent prep on it in order for your patch to last. Crews sometimes focus a lot on just the material cost, which is an important factor. But think about your traffic control cost, your labor, your time to head out to the job site, and factor those in on as you're picking the right product. Sometimes cheaper product may not end up being your actual solution, and that if you have a product that works well for your application, it might be worth the extra premium on cost. And there's also, like, I think this is probably the most popular product in the preservation partnership or type of product. There are a lot of different products out there. They all have pros and cons. And so I would just encourage you to look into, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your restrictions? Do you have dry conditions, or are you going to have to do it in the middle of a downpour? Is it freezing outside and you have to do your pat? In the world of maintenance, you don't get a pick and just follow specifications often, right? A lot of times you just have to react to a hole developing in the deck, and you're going to go out and patch it then, right? So there's going to be some products that work better for that than others, but all products benefit from good prep. So here they are, saw cutting the perimeter and then getting out, chipping down to sound concrete. These little hockey pucks are called anodes. They're zinc anodes, very easy to install, and they can help reduce what's called a halo effect, where a freshly patched material can react with concrete right next to it and actually drive corrosion just off of it. And again, different products have different tendency for that to happen. Substructure drainage, right? There's products out there that can help maintain substructures, where you can clean out, relieve that pore pressure from behind it. Additional resources. There's newsletters, there are guides. There's the TSP2 website, tsp2.org. I'm going to go through the newsletter. There are these pocket guides that have been developed specifically to help with the installation of a variety of products. These are on the TSP2 website. There's actually a guide, and then there's also a document that can be downloaded onto your smartphone. It's like a checklist format, so you can walk all the way through the process of getting your product on the ground. So this is that next step of, I'm ready to go ahead and do a deck overlay. This is an example of what that guide covers. It's meant for the person in the field, either inspecting someone else's work or doing the work themselves. But it's going to run you through looking at, is this a good product to install here? How do I do my preparation, staging, personnel? I mean, look, this is a very comprehensive list, and it was put together in collaboration with some of the industry's experts in preservation and with a broad range of industry involved, where this isn't just specific to one product. This guide will help you get a good installation with a variety of products, but it gets you all the way from condition assessment through final inspection. Again, tsp2.org is a good resource. I'd already mentioned the Bridge Preservation Guide. If you're not familiar with TC3, I would include that as well. tsp2.org. I've said it a few times. I'm going to say it once more here with our remaining few minutes. There is a lot of content available on this website, both for roadway preservation and for bridge preservation. It is the clearinghouse of this, and it is 100% free. You can get links to presentations that have been done on all of these different categories. Not only do you get to see the video presentation, so you could click in on superstructure repair, it'll have a whole list of different ones that have been done there. You can see who was the presenter, watch the video, and then you can get the PowerPoint of it as well. Very, very useful. This is one of the things that come back to me over and over, saying, wow, that is great content. I really appreciate it. I go on it every now and then when I'm looking for new resources, and it's free. I mean, it's just absolutely free to anybody. There's a lot of training that's being offered, even many of it that's geared specifically towards local agencies and taking that next step. I will try and get to some questions here. I just wanted to show up. This is my contact information and Greg's contact information, tsp2.org. And for those of you that are a little more tech savvy, you can put your phone out and take a picture use this QR code, and it'll take you to the website as well. I would like to thank Dale, Kelly, and Greg for putting this together for us. I'd like to thank everyone that's been online with us. We will give you a follow-up email that'll have the presentation information, the website information, and then your continuing education credit all packaged together. And again, just feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Want to mention, appreciate the opportunity to work together with TSP2 here today. And Dale, like you said, Dale had to head out. He wanted me to mention that for those of the attendees that want to participate in the North Dakota Road to Scholar program, to give us a shout. He was going to post it on the chat box. And if you don't find it there, feel free to give me a call and we'll get you the application form for that.
Just from us here in South Dakota, thank you. All good information. We did have some participants on here today, I believe, from South Dakota. So thank you, and maybe we'll work with you in the future.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Good job, Greg and Travis. And
Thank you.
Nice to hear you today. Thank you.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.